from the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clear Cut with Michelle McCory.
At today's ceremonies marking the 75th anniversary of D-Day, President Trump focused on thanking and singling out the American veterans of the battle. Many of them came to Normandy today, even though most of them are in their 90s.
The men behind me will tell you that they are just the lucky ones. As one of them recently put it, all the heroes are buried here. But we know what these men did. We knew how brave they were. They came here and saved freedom. And then they went home and showed us all what freedom is all about.
Now, later in the speech, President Trump told the story of one of the most extraordinary American soldiers who survived the D-Day invasion. Russell Pickett was wounded on D-Day, but he vowed to return to his company. And President Trump told the rest of Pickett's story.
6 days after D-Day, he rejoined his company. 2/3 had been killed already. Many had been wounded within 15 minutes of the invasion. They lost 19 just from the small town of Bedford, Virginia alone. Before long, a grenade left Private Pickett, and he was gravely wounded, so badly wounded. Again, he chose to return. He didn't care. He had to be here. He was then wounded a third time and laid unconscious for 12 days. They thought he was gone. They thought he had no chance. Russell Pickett is the last known survivor of the legendary Company A. And today, believe it or not, he has returned once more to these shores to be with his comrades. Private Pickett, you honor us all with your presence.
And the president also had some kind words for the people of Normandy, many of whom work hard to maintain and honor the thousands of graves of Americans who died on D-Day.
9,388 young Americans rest beneath the white crosses and stars of David, arrayed on these beautiful grounds. Each one has been adopted by a French family that thinks of him as their own. They come from all over France to look after our boys. They kneel, they cry, they pray, they place flowers, and they never forget. Today, America embraces the French people and thanks you for honoring our beloved dead. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, President Trump's speech was just one part of the special day filled with tributes and tears for those who made the ultimate sacrifice, and also a day to honor those soldiers who made it home and how they all forever changed history.
Up here. You can only have it if it's my best side, don't forget.
We know what we owe to you veterans, our freedom. On behalf of my nation, I just want to say thank you.
A poignant day, indeed. Let's discuss further with tonight's military panel. Joining us is retired Marine Corps Intelligence Officer Hal Kampfer and retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. Thank you both for being with us. Hal, let's start with you, and let's focus on what actually happened on that day from a military perspective, because despite the challenging weather, the fierce German defenses, around 156,000 Allied troops landed on Normandy's beaches on June 6. And by the end of D-Day, the Allies had established a foothold in France. Within 11 months, Nazi Germany was defeated and the war was over. Hell, this was a truly remarkable military operation.
Michelle, this was the biggest amphibious operation we've ever seen. It was mounted close to landing beaches, a little unusual because they launched from Britain, which is fairly close to where Normandy is. But these were heavily opposed beaches. I mean, the German fortifications, even with this massive strategic and operational deception plan to pull forces away from the beaches, they still were met with major fortifications, artillery, machine guns. They'd had chances to prep. There was all this stuff that was meeting them. And then when they came ashore, unlike what we saw in the Pacific, a lot of the troops were actually coming out of what are called Higgins boats. Now, Higgins boats are things you see in that movie, Saving Private Ryan, where the front of the boat just opens up and they run onto the beach. Of course, when you run onto a beach that's covered with, grazing, enfilade, fixed machine gun fire and everything else, they took horrendous casualties. But they pressed on, and they got the basically what we call a forced beachhead. They pressed in, and they weren't kicked off. And it was tough weather. There was a lot of things that could have gone wrong, but the perseverance of our forces really is what made the day. Remarkable perseverance. Remarkable bravery. Jessie, this military venture, I mean, it was something else. It involved, as we mentioned, over 156,000 Allied troops, 7,000 ships, 10,000 landing vehicles, and thousands of casualties. Jessie, as we remember the greatest day of the greatest generation, what resonates with you?
Well, the morning that they awoke on Normandy, the Nazis looked out at a sea that had those 7,000 ships, the largest naval operation ever in the history of the world, and hopefully the last. Because on those ships were 130,000 warriors that knew the first wave would probably be killed. The beaches were so heavily fortified that they knew the first men that hit those beaches would be struck. And when they started to move forward, the colonel that was asked of the 16th Infantry Regiment, they asked him, what are you going to do if the Germans squash you and they should win and they should destroy your men? He said, well, we have another regiment behind me. And he named off every single regiment after that, every armored unit after that, that would follow him. He said, some of us will die, but some will live. And he knew that some will conquer this. They knew that when they hit that first round, that first wave, many would die. And there was a medic that was there today that was also recognized. He had been awarded 2 Purple Hearts already prior to even getting there in Africa. He had already fought in Africa. He was in that first wave with his brother. And of their little vessel that had arose, there were 32 men, only 6 survived. He was repeatedly hit by fire. He almost died himself. The next morning he woke up and he looked over at the bed beside him, and guess who was there? His brother. The 2 brothers lived, and one is still alive today that was there with the president.
Remarkable stories of bravery and sacrifice and heroism. Hell, as you mentioned, the element of misinformation and surprise was crucial in the success of Normandy. With the satellite technology that's available today, could an operation like this be possible now?
Michelle, it'd be awful tough. Not just the satellite systems, but all the airborne systems and everything else. the idea of being able to mount a major operation, something, the 7,000 ships, 156,000 troops, all the aviation, everything else going on, very difficult. It was difficult to do even then. That's why there was this massive strategic and operational deception campaign that had been going on for a very long time to pull German forces away from that part of Europe, basically, and also to pull the forces that were in France and in that area away from the Normandy beaches further south. It's just an amazing piece of history in terms of what we did. And even then, once we hit the beaches, the Germans held back key units because they thought that was just basically a deception plan and that the main attack was going to go elsewhere. So even with that, it was a tough fight, but we did prevail, and that's the lesson learned.
Right. The former Secretary of State John Kerry also attended the services in France. He spoke to I-24 News and said why he thinks this year's commemorations are especially critical.
The 75th anniversary is an incredibly important moment, particularly given what's happening in a lot of countries in Europe. It's really a time to reflect on the importance of unity, of the values that people fought for here, the fight against tyranny, against fascism, against authoritarianism.
Kerry also spoke to CNBC in Normandy, and he was asked to respond to recent criticism from current Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Last month, Pompeo described Kerry's reported conversations with his former Iranian counterpart as inappropriate. Kerry spoke. He said that he only spoke to an Iranian foreign minister once about the Trump administration's decision to pull out of the deal. And Jessie, this comes at a point where we're seeing a disconnect between the U.S. and its allies on the issue of Iran. The president and President Macron did discuss Iran. The president said that they're on the same page with not wanting Iran to have nuclear weapons. But, Jessie, very quickly, why is it that they're not on the same page regarding strategy and execution?
And that's a very difficult question to even answer, but they did have a relationship with the Obama administration that essentially enabled them to support Iran. Many people believe that they have greater things at stake, and this chokehold that Iran has had over the Western civilization is pretty astronomical. It's hard for me to even get my own head around it, because we know that we just defeated a tyranny 75 years ago, but the face of evil has only converted itself into the mullahs in Iran.
Jessie, I'm going to have to leave it there. Jessie Jane Duff, Hell Kemper, thank you. We'll be right back.